Who's your favorite philosopher and why? That's a deep question. Um, it depends on the flavor of the week. When you look at people like Bertrand Russell, he's probably the most rigorous of the rigorous philosophers, and he created this amazing deductive construct to walk his way through uh, dissecting an argument, dissecting a belief, and trying to turn it into as much of a repeatable, objective conversation as possible. So the whole field of analytic philosophy. You look at people like Wittgenstein, and there's this absolutely amazing deconstruction of language. Nietzsche talked a lot about the human condition, and there's the three schools of Viennese philosophy. You have the will to power, to will to meaning, and will to pleasure. So Freud is the pleasure side, and Viktor Frankl's the meaning, and Nietzsche was power, and man's pursuit and search for that. And Schopenhauer is tremendously cynical on the human condition. Others are very optimistic about it. So you can walk your way through philosophy, and as you do that walk through philosophy, all of these different philosophers have hints of brilliance and hints of things that are absurd and insane, whether it be extreme misogyny or their brain is being eaten away by syphilis, so they're obviously going a little crazy in certain dimensions, or an inability to communicate clearly. Dan Dennett, I really liked because he put so much emphasis and time on trying to clearly articulate what he was saying for everybody, as opposed to a lot of these people, especially the postmodernists, the Foucault people, who they just made an art form out of obfuscating what they're actually saying, because I think they were saying nothing the more I think about it. I love the absurdists. Albert Camus is one of my favorite philosophers there, and his whole book that he wrote on Sisyphus is a great example of life and how to think about life and the love of the system as opposed to the love of the destination. Uh, Stoic philosophy has really recently become vogue, and people are dragging Aurelius and Seneca and others out of the grave. It's saying, okay, guys, we need you again. We're going to have a return to Stoicism. I think that's the Jordan Peterson effect, where he came in and opened up a whole can of worms of a tree of philosophy, and young men that get into that trap, they start exploring all the branches of that tree, and they bring it together. But there are some good life lessons there. So different boats for different floats, but really philosophy is about, well, where is two things. You either have a set of problems that you want to work your way through and solve, or you have a destination you're trying to figure out to go to. So self-meaning of your life, or understanding why things have happened, or how to resolve things that are happening inside your life. There is definitely a philosophical component there. And any good philosopher has to have a statement about the nature of suffering and the need of sacrifice, and also how to reconcile the fact that evil exists and bad things exist, and to forgive people. And what does that process look like? Regressive, terrible philosophies like the woke stuff, for example, they are regressive and terrible because they have no doctrine of forgiveness. Once a person's been labeled problematic, you have to hate them for the rest of time. It's a holy war between you and them. All the good stuff tends to have some rites of passage or rituals you can go through to cleanse your sins and basically be healed of these things. Mark Andreessen actually has this great thing where he basically breaks down wokeism and he puts it into a religious context, and he shows how it's becoming like a religion, but it's a religion like an Old Testament religion, lots of rules and no mercy. God is very angry. It's the old God, and that is what it is. Also, philosophers should ignite curiosity. They should dance around and explore and understand problems in a way that when you read it, it doesn't necessarily provide you clarity on the solution, but it, at the very least, gives you some love of the pursuit of the answer to that problem. For example, when you think about, are humans intrinsically evil or not, Peter Sanger is an example of that. The denial of death is another example of that. A philosopher wrote that. I forget his name, and it'll come to me in a little bit. But there's dozens of these things that exist that they kind of give a lens into something, you read it, and if it's good philosophy, it's it invites you to carry that with you as an open question that you'll have for a long time. I've been reading a lot of transhumanist philosophy as well, recently. This idea of, well, where do we go when we augment people? Because I'm a participant in that industry. I have a synthetic biology company. I own a biotechnology company. We do anti-aging and regenerative medicine. We're not too far away from gene therapies or other interventions. We're actually changing the human organism to optimize it towards some end, either to repair damage that's been done or to prevent future damage or to augment and enhance the lifespan or capabilities in some way. So that house of philosophy, transhumanism, is not well understood or fleshed out. You have the Nick Boströms or other people, but you don't have a dominant set of theories yet that people can fall to and say, okay, these guardrails from a bioethics viewpoint make sense outside of fiction like Gattaca and these types of things. But yeah, it's an interesting question, and it's one a lot of people should ask. And as you get older, your favorite philosophers change. And so when I was younger, I really liked the black and whiteness of Bertrand Russell. I really enjoyed analytic philosophy because I had this belief you could turn the crank and derive answers to things. He spent his whole early part of his mathematical career with Alfred North Whitehead and others trying to do that in mathematics itself, and it didn't work. And as I've gotten older, I've started realizing and valuing that philosophy that allows you to deal with the consequences of ambiguity and navigate the ocean of ambiguity while keeping a stable core are more meaningful and much more important, which is ironically how virtue ethics and a lot of old philosophies like Stoicism have become resurrected again, because that's the entire thing. They lived in the most uncertain world possible. They didn't have any understanding of the world beyond the gods are doing things to us. So volcanoes were erupting and plagues would happen and people would randomly show up and kill you. And, that was that. Raiders would show up and destroy your village, and the sea people, they ended all the Bronze Age empires, and we don't know who they were. And so that's an example of the world that they lived in. So you needed some construct that allowed you to deal with extreme uncertainty and ambiguity. I've started valuing that far more, as I've gotten older. And I'm starting to realize that there's more to human consciousness than a very materialistic Thomas Hobbesian view of human consciousness. So I'm starting to really explore and understand more about altered states of human consciousness and people who think around the consequences of what would happen if a human could perceive more. Because we only perceive like a little dot, and the universe is so much vaster. A great example would be, if you're listening to this, go to Google and search how bees perceive flowers. And you can click images and you can see pictures of it because they can see more of the visible spectrum than we can, which is really remarkable. And you say, wow, that's incredible. And then you start thinking around, well, how does everything else perceive stuff? There's humans, they have a condition called synesthesia, and they perceive music and the written word and concepts differently. Like there's a wonderful book called Wednesday's Indigo Blue, which talks about people following people with synesthesia and how they live with that condition.